Here's something that doesn't make sense. The German Panther tank, 45 tons of Krupp steel, a high-velocity 75 mm gun that could kill anything at 2 kilometers, sloped armor that deflected shells like a geometric miracle. The German Tiger, 57 tons of pure intimidation. The legendary 88 mm gun, the same weapon that terrorized Allied aircraft and tanks alike. Frontal armor so thick you could fire at it all day and accomplish nothing. These were the monsters of World War II, the beasts that made Allied tankers wake up in cold sweats. And then there was the American Sherman, 30 tons, a 75 mm gun designed in 1940, before America even entered the war. Armor that German gunners described as disappointing. Not disappointing to shoot at, disappointing because it was too easy. German tankers called Sherman Tommy cookers because they burned so easily with British crews inside. American tankers had their own names. Ronsons like the cigarette lighter, light first time, every time. Barning gravis. Zippos. Death traps. There is a saying in the armor divisions. It takes 5 Shermans to kill 1 Panther, and 4 of them won't make it home. So here's my question. How did a 24-year-old farm boy from Texas climb into one of these tin cans and destroy 258 German vehicles in 11 months? How did he knock out 9 tanks in a single day, Panthers and Panzer IVs that were supposed to be his executioners? How did he survive 21 tank battles when most Sherman crews didn't survive their first? His name was Lafayette Pool, Staff Sergeant, 3rd Armor Division, commander of a Sherman tank, named in the mood. By every metric that mattered, armor thickness, gun velocity, mechanical reliability, he should have died in Normandy like thousands of other tankers. He didn't. He became the deadliest American tank commander of the entire war. Not because his tank was better. It wasn't. Not because. He was lucky. Luck runs out after 21 battles. He won because he understood something that German engineers never put in their technical manuals. Let's break it down to understand how Lafayette Pool became the deadliest American tanker of World War II. We need to understand where he came from. And we need to understand the world he grew up in, because that world shaped everything that came after. Lafayette Pool was born on July 23, 1919, in Odom, Texas. If you've never heard of Odom, don't worry. Most people haven't. It's a small town in San Patricio County, about 20 miles northwest of Corpus Christi. In 1919, it had a population of maybe a few hundred people. Farming country, cotton, cattle, hard work under a brutal Texas sun. The Pool family wasn't wealthy. They weren't poor either, at least not by the standards of rural Texas in the 1920s. They were working people, the kind of Americans who measured their worth by the calluses on their hands and the sweat on their brows. Lafayette, who everyone called War Daddy later in life, but was just Pool to his army buddies, grew up learning to work. Hard, physical, relentless work. He learned to fix things that broke. He learned to make do with what he had. He learned that complaining about your circumstances didn't change them. Only action did. These lessons would save his life more times than he could count. Pool was also a natural athlete. In a small Texas town in the 1930s, that meant football. He played for his high school team with the same intensity he would later bring to tank warfare. He wasn't the biggest player on the field, but he was fast, aggressive, and absolutely fearless. Coaches noticed something about Pool that set him apart. He could read the game. While other players focused on their immediate assignments, Pool seemed to understand the entire field. He anticipated where plays were going. He positioned himself to be in the right place at the right time. This wasn't just athleticism. This was tactical thinking, the ability to process a chaotic situation and make split-second decisions that turn out to be right. It was a skill you couldn't teach. You either had it or you didn't. The Pool had it in abundance. After high school, Pool didn't have the money or the opportunity for college. The Great Depression had hit Texas hard, as it had hit everywhere else. Jobs were scarce. Opportunities were scarcer. Pool did what millions of young American men did in the late 1930s. He looked for work wherever he could find it. He worked on farms. He worked on ranches. He did odd jobs. He was 20 years old when World War II began in Europe in September 1939. He was 22 when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. And like millions of other young Americans, he knew his life was about to change forever. Poole enlisted in the United States Army in 1942. He didn't wait to be drafted. He volunteered. When asked what branch he wanted to serve in, he chose armor. Tanks. It was an interesting choice. The United States Army's armored forces were still relatively new. The armored force had only been established in 1940. American tank doctrine was still being developed. American tanks themselves were still being designed. Poole couldn't have known exactly what he was getting into, but something about tanks appealed to him. The combination of mobility, firepower, and protection. The idea of carrying your fortress with you in a battle. The mechanical complexity that rewarded men who understood machines. Whatever the reason, Poole chose tanks. And tanks would make him a legend. Now, before we follow Poole into combat, we need to talk about the machine he would fight in. Because understanding the M4 Sherman is essential to understanding what Poole accomplished. And, I mean really understanding it, not just repeating the myths. The M4 Sherman medium tank was the tank destroyers would be there to handle them. In practice, things didn't work out that way. In practice, Sherman encountered German tanks constantly. In practice, tank destroyers weren't always available. In practice, Sherman crews had to fight Panthers and Tigers with a tank that was never designed for that job. And they died in horrifying numbers. Let's talk about the specific disadvantages Sherman crews faced. The early Sherman models had a 75mm M3 gun. This was a decent weapon for 1942. It could kill a Panzer III or early Panzer IV at reasonable ranges. But by 1944, when the Allies landed in Normandy, the German army was fielding Panthers and Tigers in significant numbers. The 75mm gun could not penetrate the frontal armor of a Panther at any range. Let me say that again. At any range. You could drive a Sherman right up to a Panther's front plate, put your gun against the armor, fire, and the shell would bounce off. To kill a Panther with a 75mm Sherman, you had to hit the side armor, or the rear. That meant maneuvering around a tank that could kill you from 2 kilometers away while you try to get close enough to hit its flanks. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. The Tiger was even worse. The Tiger's frontal armor was over 100mm thick, and it was vertical, not sloped. But 100mm of vertical armor is still effectively impenetrable to a 75mm Sherman gun. The Tiger's 88mm gun, meanwhile, could destroy a Sherman from virtually any angle at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. A Tiger could sit hull down on a ridge and pick off Shermans like targets at a shooting gallery. Sherman crews couldn't even fight back. Effectively, they could only hope to close the distance, survive long enough to get a flank shot, and pray. Many didn't make it. Sherman armor was another problem. The frontal armor on a standard M4 Sherman was about 51mm thick, sloped at various angles, depending on the model. This was adequate against the 50mm guns on early German tanks. It was not adequate against the 75mm gun on the Panther or the 88mm on the Tiger. German shells went through Sherman armor with disturbing ease. When they penetrated, they typically caused catastrophic damage. Sherman tanks stored their ammunition in sponsons along the hull sides. When a German shell entered the crew compartment, it often ignited this ammunition. The tank became an inferno within seconds. Sherman crews had a name for this, brewing up. A tank that brewed up gave its crew maybe 10 seconds to escape before the interior became unsurvivable. Many crews didn't get those 10 seconds. The shell that penetrated the armor often killed or incapacitated crew members directly. Even if the crew was unharmed by the initial penetration, the fire spread so quickly that escape was often impossible. This is why American tankers gave a Sherman those terrible nicknames. Ronson, Zippo, Tommy Cooker, Death Trap. These weren't jokes. These were the honest assessments of men who had to climb into these vehicles every day, knowing the odds were against them. Morale in American armored units was a constant challenge. How do you motivate men to fight in a vehicle they know is inferior? How do you maintain discipline when every crew member understands that today might be the day a German shell finds them? The Army tried various solutions. Better training, more infantry support. Air superiority was needed to destroy German tanks before they could engage. Later in the war, some Shermans were upgunned with a 76mm M1 gun, which could penetrate Panther armor at closer range. Ranges. Some were equipped with the 17-pounder gun and called Fireflies by the British. These modifications helped, but they didn't eliminate the fundamental problem. The Sherman was a medium tank being asked to fight heavy tanks. It was a war of mismatched gladiators, and Sherman crews knew they were the ones with the shorter swords that... Oh, how did Lafayette Pool survive this? How did he not just survive, but thrive? How did he become the deadliest American tanker of the war in a tank that was objectively inferior to its opponents? The answer lies in understanding that tank warfare is not a simple equation of armor thickness plus gun caliber equals victory. It's far more complex than that. And Pool understood the complexity better than almost anyone else in the 3rd Armored Division. The Pool arrived in England with the 3rd Armored Division in late 1943. The division spent months training for the invasion of France. Pool used his time wisely. He studied everything he could about tanks, both American and German. He learned Sherman's strengths and weaknesses intimately. He practiced gunnery until his crew could put a shell on target faster than any other crew in the company. He drilled his crew in emergency procedures, escape protocols, and combat formations. He was obsessive about preparation. Other tank commanders relaxed when they could. Pool trained that he also developed a tactical philosophy that would serve him throughout the war. Pool understood that Sherman's disadvantages in armor and firepower could be partially offset by other factors. Speed, surprise, aggression, accuracy, crew coordination. The Sherman was faster than the Tiger. It had a lower profile than the Panther. It was more mechanically reliable than either. Its turret traversed faster than German turrets. Its rate of fire was higher. These advantages wouldn't help in a head-on engagement at long range. But Pool didn't intend to fight head-on at long range. He intended to fight on his terms, not the enemy's. Pool's tactical approach can be summarized in a few principles. First, never fight fair. If the enemy has the advantage, change the situation until you have the advantage. Use terrain. Use cover. Use smoke. Use speed. Use anything that shifts the odds in your favor. Second, shoot first. The tank that fires first in an engagement usually wins. Pool drilled his crew relentlessly on target acquisition and engagement speed. His gunner, Corporal Wilbert Richards, became one of the best in the division. They could identify a target, traverse the turret, and fire in seconds. Those seconds were often the difference between life and death. Third, shoot accurately. A fast miss is still a miss. Pool's crew practiced gunnery constantly. They knew their weapons' ballistics at every range. They knew where to aim on different German vehicles to maximize penetration. They didn't waste ammunition on low-probability shots. When they fired, they hit. Fourth, keep moving. A stationary tank is a dead tank. Pool rarely stopped during engagements. He fired on the move when possible. He changed positions constantly. German gunners trying to target his Sherman found themselves aiming at a moving target that refused to cooperate. Fifth, know your enemy. Pool studied German tanks and German tactics. He knew the Tiger's turret traversed slowly. He knew the Panther's side armor was weaker than its front. He knew German tank commanders often exposed themselves in their turret hatches for better visibility. He exploited every weakness he could find. The 3rd Armored Division landed in Normandy. On June 23, 1944, about 2 weeks after D-Day, they entered combat almost immediately. The fighting in Normandy was brutal. The bocage, the thick hedgerows that divided Norman farm fields, was a nightmare for tanks. Every field was a potential ambush site. German infantry with Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons hid behind hedgerows, waiting for tanks to pass. German tanks and tank destroyers set up hull-down positions with clear fields of fire. American tankers couldn't see threats until they were right on top of them. Casualties were horrific. The 3rd Armored Division suffered some of the highest losses of any American division in the war. They would eventually be nicknamed the Spearhead Division, but the spear was constantly being blunted by German resistance. Pool's first significant engagements came during the breakout from Normandy in late July 1944. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25th, was designed to break through German lines and allow American forces to sweep into the French interior. The 3rd Armored Division was in the thick of it. Pool began to distinguish himself immediately. Where other tank commanders were hesitant, Pool was aggressive. Where others waited for support, Pool attacked. He seemed to have an instinct for finding the right position, the right angle, the right moment to strike. His crew began to believe they were invincible. They weren't, of course. No one is invincible in war. But confidence matters. A crew that believes in their commander fights better than a crew that doesn't. Pool's crew believed. During the breakout, Pool's tank, which he had named in the mood after the famous Glenn Miller song, became a feared presence on the battlefield. German units began to recognize the aggressive Sherman that seemed to appear out of nowhere, fire with deadly accuracy, and disappear before legend. It was faster than any Allied fighter, more maneuverable than anything the Americans, British, or Dutch could put in the air. Its pilots were trained for years before seeing combat. Some had been flying since the 1930s, with experience from the war in China. When a Zero appeared in the sky, Allied pilots learned to run. Not fight, run. The kill ratios were obscene. In the early months of the war, Zeros were shooting down Allied aircraft at rates of 10-1, sometimes 20-1. American pilots who survived encounters with Zeros described them as supernatural. The planes could turn on a dime, climb like rockets, and stay in the air for incredible distances. One pilot said fighting a Zero was like fighting a hummingbird with a sledgehammer. You couldn't hit them. You couldn't escape them. You could only die. Against this backdrop of Japanese dominance, America was scrambling to find any advantage. Their best fighters, the P-40 Warhawk, the F-4F Wildcat, were slower than the Zero, less maneuverable, and often outclassed. The Navy was desperately trying to rebuild after Pearl Harbor, with only 3 aircraft carriers left operational in the Pacific. And on the decks of those carriers sat a plane that nobody expected to become a legend, the Douglas SBD Dauntless. Let me tell you about the Dauntless, because understanding this aircraft is key to understanding everything that happened next. The SBD Dauntless was a dive bomber. Its job was simple: fly over an enemy ship, tip its nose straight down toward the ocean, plunge at a near vertical angle, release a bomb at the last possible second, and pull out before hitting the water. That's it. It wasn't designed to dogfight. It wasn't designed to outrun fighters. It was designed to deliver a single bomb with pinpoint accuracy. Everything about the aircraft reflected this purpose. It was slow. Speed. Gunner Wilbur Richards rarely missed. Driver Bert Oglesby could maneuver the Sherman through terrain other drivers considered impassable. Bow gunner and assistant driver Del Boggs provided additional firepower and watched for threats the commander might miss. They trusted each other with their lives. In a tank crew, that trust is everything. August 1944 brought some of Pool's most impressive engagements. The American advance had trapped large German forces in the Falaise Pocket, and desperate German units were trying to break out. Pool's platoon encountered retreating German columns repeatedly. In one engagement, Pool's single tank destroyed a column of German vehicles, including trucks, half-tracks, and a self-propelled gun. The Germans never saw him coming. Pool had positioned his tank behind a farmhouse, waited until the column was in his kill zone, and opened fire. The lead vehicle and the rear vehicle were destroyed first, trapping everything in between. Then Pool's crew methodically destroyed the rest. It was a textbook ambush executed perfectly. When Pool reported his kills to his company commander, the officer didn't believe him at first. No single tank could have done that much damage. But the wrecks were there for everyone to see. But Pool's most famous day came on September 19, 1944. This was the day that cemented his legend. The day he destroyed 12 German tanks. 12. In a single day of fighting. Some accounts say 9 confirmed tank kills and 3 probables. Other accounts give slightly different numbers. The exact count has been debated by historians. But even the most conservative estimates credit Pool with destroying more German tanks in one day than most Sherman commanders destroyed in their entire careers. The engagement took place near the town of Münsterbusch in Germany. The 3rd Armored Division was pushing into German territory, and the Germans were defending with everything they had. Pool's platoon encountered a German armored counterattack. Multiple Panzers, Panzer IVs, Stu-GS. This was exactly the kind of fight a Sherman was supposed to lose. Pool didn't get the memo. The battle began in the early morning. German tanks were spotted moving through a valley. Standard doctrine would have called for Pool to report the enemy positions, wait for reinforcements, and engage with combined arms support. Pool didn't have time for standard doctrine. The German tanks were moving toward American infantry positions. If they got through, the infantry would be slaughtered. Pool made a decision. He attacked, and the mood roared forward, not toward the German tanks, but parallel to their line of advance. Pool was looking for a flanking position. He found it, a low ridge that provided cover for his approach and a clear line of fire to the German column's flank. Pool's crew went to work. Wilbert Richards put the first round into the lead Panzer IV. A clean hit. The tank stopped, smoke pouring from its hatches. Before the Germans could react, Richards was already traversing to the next target. Another hit. Another kill. The German column was thrown into confusion. They had expected to encounter American forces from the front. This fire was coming from their flank. They couldn't immediately locate the source. Pool kept firing. 3rd target. 4th. 5th. Bird Oglesby kept the tank moving slightly between shots, making it harder for the Germans to pinpoint their location. Willis Aller loaded round after round, his movements automatic from thousands of hours of practice. The Germans tried to respond. Turrets swung toward Pool's position, but Pool was already moving. He had identified his next hull-down position before firing his first shot. As German rounds impacted wherein the mood had been, Pool was setting up for his next series of kills. The engagement lasted several hours. Pool's platoon, not just his tank, but the tanks under his command, destroyed multiple German vehicles. But Pool's personal count was staggering. Tank after tank fell to his crew's accurate fire. When the battle was over, the valley floor was littered with burning German armor. Pool's company commander, then his battalion commander, then his regimental commander, all came to see the results. They counted the wrecks. They verified the claims. The numbers were real. What made this engagement possible? How did Pool accomplish something that defied all the statistical expectations for Sherman versus Panzer combat? The answer lies in understanding what Pool did differently. He didn't fight the battle the Germans expected. He refused to engage frontally, whereas Sherman's weak armor and gun would be decisive disadvantages. Instead, he found a flanking position that negated the German armor advantage. He caught the Germans by surprise, denying them the chance to use their superior range. He fired first, fired accurately, and kept moving. Each of these elements was individually important. Together, they were devastating. This is the lesson of Pool's combat career. The Sherman's disadvantages were real, but they weren't absolute. A skilled commander who understood his vehicle's limitations and his enemy's weaknesses could overcome the statistical odds. Pool proved it again and again. The fall of 1944 brought some of the hardest fighting of the war. The German army had retreated to their own borders, but they hadn't given up. The West Wall, the line of fortifications along Germany's western frontier, had to be breached. The fighting was brutal, costly, and slow. Pool was in the thick of it constantly. His reputation grew with each engagement. Soldiers in the 3rd Armored Division began to seek out Pool's platoon, wanting to be near the tank commander who seemed to be bulletproof. Other tank commanders studied his tactics, tried to learn from his success. Pool became something of a mentor, sharing his knowledge with crews who were willing to listen. He emphasized the same principles over and over. Shoot first, shoot straight, keep moving, never fight fair. Pool's crew developed a superstitious attachment to their tank. Inamud had survived battles that destroyed other Shermans. It had taken hits that should have killed them all, but somehow didn't. The crew painted signs on the tank, added personal touches, treated it almost like a living thing. This wasn't unusual among tank crews. A tank that had survived became a lucky tank. No one wanted to transfer to a new vehicle. The luck might not transfer with them. And the Mood had plenty of luck, but it also had Pool. The two were inseparable in the crew's minds. October and November 1944 were a grinding advance into Germany. The 3rd Armored Division fought through the industrial Ruhr region, some of the most heavily defended territory in the Reich. German resistance stiffened. They were defending their homeland now. Every town, every village, every factory became a fortress. Pool continued to lead from the front. His kill count continued to climb. By November 1944, he had destroyed over 200 enemy vehicles. No other American tanker came close. His fame spread beyond the 3rd Armored Division. War correspondents wrote stories about him. Generals knew his name. He was recommended for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation would eventually be downgraded to a Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest award for valor in the U.S. Army. The exact reasons for the downgrade are lost to history. Politics, paperwork, the chaos of war. It doesn't really matter. Pool's record speaks for itself, but war doesn't reward heroes forever. On November 23, 1944, Pool's luck finally ran out. The 3rd Armored Division was fighting near the town of Stahlberg, Germany. Pool's platoon was engaged with German armor and infantry. Pool was doing what he always did, leading from the front, exposing himself in the turret hatch to get better visibility of the battlefield. A German round struck in the Mood. This time, the tank's luck couldn't save its commander. The explosion wounded Pool severely. His leg was shattered. Shrapnel tore into his body. His crew managed to get him out of the tank before it brewed up. They saved his life, but Pool's war was over. He was evacuated to a field hospital, then to England, then eventually to the United States. He would spend months recovering from his wounds. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. He would never command a tank in combat again. Pool's final combat statistics are remarkable by any measure. In 11 months of combat, he had destroyed 258 enemy vehicles. This included 12 tanks and tank destroyers on his best day. His overall confirmed tank kills exceeded 60. Some sources claim higher numbers. The exact count is difficult to verify because records were imperfect and Pool was not the type to keep careful count himself. He was more interested in winning the next battle than in tallying scores from the last one. But even conservative estimates place him as the highest-scoring American tank ace of World War II. No one else came close. His closest competitors had perhaps half his total. Pool's success becomes even more impressive when you consider the context. He achieved these numbers in a tank that was objectively inferior to German armor. He achieved them against an enemy that was fighting on the defensive, often in prepared positions. He achieved them in some of the most brutal fighting of the entire war. And he achieved them while keeping his crew alive through 21 major engagements. His crew suffered their only casualties on the day Pool himself was wounded. Before that, they had fought through some of the deadliest battles on the Western Front without losing a single man. After the war, Pool returned to Texas. He married his sweetheart, Mary. They had 3 children. Pool tried to live a normal life, but fame followed him. He was invited to tank reunions, veterans events, and military ceremonies. He gave interviews to historians and journalists. He was humble about his accomplishments, often deflecting credit to his crew. "We were a team," he said repeatedly. "I didn't do it alone." This was true, of course. No tank commander operates in isolation. But it was also characteristic of Pool's personality. He wasn't in it for glory. He was in it to do the job and bring his men home alive. Pool's health was never fully the same after his wounding. The injuries he sustained on November 23, 1944, affected him for the rest of his life. He dealt with chronic pain. He walked with difficulty, but he never complained. He raised his family, worked his land, and lived as normal a life as he could. He became a legend in the tank community, a name spoken with reverence by armored soldiers who studied his tactics. When historians compiled lists of the great tank aces of World War II, Pool's name appeared alongside German legends like Michael Wittmann and Soviet heroes like Dmitry Lavrenenko. The difference was that Pool achieved his record in a tank that should have lost every fight. That made his accomplishment even more remarkable. Lafayette Pool died on May 30th, 1991, at the age of 71. He was buried in his beloved Texas. His legacy lives on in the armored forces of the United States Army. Tank commanders still study his tactics. His name is spoken in armor school classrooms. He represents something important, the idea that the man inside the machine matters as much as the machine itself. German engineers built better tanks. American engineers built more tanks. But victory didn't go to the side with better or more equipment. Victory went to the side that used its equipment more effectively. Pool understood this. He lived it. He proved it in battle after battle. What can we learn from Lafayette Pool's story? Several things. First, that statistics don't always tell the whole story. On paper, a Sherman versus Panther engagement should always favor the Panther. In reality, battles are decided by terrain, tactics, training, and the decisions of individual commanders. Pool exploited every advantage he could find and minimized his disadvantages through skill and preparation. Second, that training matters enormously. Pool's crew didn't become one of the deadliest in the war by accident. They practiced constantly. They drilled every procedure until it was automatic. When the shooting started, they didn't have to think. They reacted with practiced precision. Those fractions of seconds added up to survival. Third, that leadership matters. Pool led from the front. He shared the dangers with his men. He made decisions quickly and stood by them. His crew trusted him completely. That trust made them willing to follow him into situations that would have terrified lesser crews. Fourth, that the right mindset can overcome material disadvantages. Pool never accepted that his Sherman was destined to lose. He refused to fight on the enemy's terms. He created his own terms through speed, surprise, and aggression. He turned the supposed disadvantages of the Sherman into something manageable through clever tactics. Fifth, that every weapon system has weaknesses, and finding those weaknesses is often more important than having superior equipment. Pool studied German tanks obsessively. He knew where their armor was thin. He knew how slow their turrets traversed. He knew that German commanders often exposed themselves for better visibility. He exploited every weakness he found. The story of Lafayette Pool is, in many ways, a story about the human element in warfare. Technology matters. Equipment matters. Numbers matter. But in the end, wars are fought by people. And exceptional people can achieve exceptional things, even when the odds are stacked against them. Pool faced those odds every day for 11 months. He beat them through skill, preparation, and sheer force of will. He took a tank that American soldiers called a death trap and turned it into a weapon of destruction that German soldiers learned to fear. So yeah, now you know how a Texas farm boy in a tin can become the deadliest American tanker of World War II. You understand why Sherman's weaknesses didn't doom Pool's crew. You know the tactics he used to overcome superior German armor. You know how training and leadership can make the difference between victory and defeat. That's going to cost you one subscription. Or drop a comment below telling me this. What other World War II tank ace do you want me to cover? Because Pool wasn't the only one who defied the odds. There was a German commander who destroyed 138 tanks. A Soviet tanker that knocked out 52 German vehicles in a single day. A British sergeant who held off an entire Panzer division with one tank. History is full of these stories.